Hello and welcome back, adventurers. This is Captain TTRPG, and today we're talking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. A soft melody sweeps across the stale tavern. Two parties of adventurers, tired from month-long campaigns on the road, laugh and drink together as they regale one another with trumped-up stories of triumph while ignoring their misadventures. A massive orc, puffing on his pipe, rests his eyes and leans back in his chair as he plays the lute from memory alone. As a lanky elf dressed in magnificent robes goes to buy another round, he reaches for a coin pouch that no longer exists. His eyes darken towards a leather-clad gnome known for thievery and backstabbing. Accusations begin to fly, waking the orc from his slumber. The gnome, dagger in hand, flings a glance toward the perceptive performer, who proceeds to drop the lute and grab his nearby guitar. A power chord is struck before a riff for the ages blasts the room. His allies suddenly erupt with great courage, and the fight begins proper. Fists, spells, and pints of ale obscure what just moments ago was a clear and serene time. Though the orc's allies land critical blows from time to time, it is clear that the tide has turned against them. Despite the expertly executed musical accompaniment, the time has come to leave this establishment for another. There's no time for a guitar. It requires a more subtle approach. Without warning, the riffs end, and a twang slams against the eardrums of the unfortunate patrons. A banjo, tuned to perfection, can be heard over the commotion, played at record speed. The victors, confused by the sudden change of atmosphere, let up just enough for the defeated to find their feet. Inspired by the orc, they make haste for the door, their musician ally hot on their heels, living to fight another day. Hello, adventurers! Today we are talking about the Bard. Bards are powerful spellcasters with the strongest non-healing support design of any class. Extremely flexible, capable of adjusting playstyles quickly, providing different buffs to the party. Bards are full spellcasters and spontaneous spellcasters at that, which means they're going to learn a bunch of spells at every level that they can use with any spell slots they have for that level. They just can't upcast them all freely. They gain access to many focus cantrips, as well as regular focus spells, that provide different buffs, but the focus cantrips are very special here. They're also partial martial builds that you can make, and their 8 HP makes it possible, along with getting access to martial weapons and light armor. The different subclasses provide you with different ways to buff your allies via composition cantrips that are special to them. More on composition cantrips in just a minute here. They are a charisma-based class, so that'll be your primary ability score. What does that mean generally, though? It means these are going to be amazing social encounter players as well. No surprise that a bard is going to do well on social encounters, and performance is especially powerful for you. Normally, even on a charisma-based character, I'd say performance is questionably useful. On a bard, they get amazing uses for performance, so don't ignore performance. You'll get trained in it for free. You're going to want to keep boosting it up. They're a great choice for characters that you want to lean heavily into intimidation, deception, and diplomacy as well, or possibly all three. You can easily face the party, but if not, you can use all these things in combat as well. With access to light armor and martial weapons, they're really well designed to use finesse or ranged weapons. That's because you're going to want to up your dexterity for the light armor anyway, and while you're doing that, if you really want to get into any sort of martial combat, might as well just boost that dex up and have it nice and high so you can attack with it. But enough about these martial possibilities. Let's get into the meat of the actual class and what makes them special. Composition spells. Composition spells, this is a special name for the type of focus spells they get. But they get a combination of focus spells that use focus points and what are called composition cantrips. These ones don't use focus points, but only last for one round. So you'll be casting them a lot. Composition spells are like any other focus spell in that they use a focus point, but you'll get access to focus points that you can, of course, get back like usual between combats, assuming you have 10 minutes of downtime. You'll get a lot more use out of composition cantrips than your composition spells, generally speaking. At least that's my experience. The interesting thing about these composition cantrips is that they are emanation spells. So they cause all allies within an area around you to gain bonuses. The one that all bards get out the gate is Courageous Anthem. And this will give a +1 bonus, and this is a status bonus, mind you, to all allies' attacks, damage, and save against fear that are in the area. Those are all so good. +1 to attack means not only chance to hit, but chance to crit. The damage probably won't come in too handy. The +1's not a huge deal. The saves against fear, though, doesn't sound amazing, but keep in mind that Demoralize is an action a lot of creatures will probably try to use, so getting to resist that fear is a big deal. The majority of these cantrips can't be sustained, which means every single turn you're going to have to use an action to recast them, but that means you can also switch which one you're using. You can only have one composition spell, cantrip or otherwise, active at a time. So if you have one composition spell that lasts a minute that you keep going, you can't also cast a composition cantrip to run at the same time. When you cast the cantrip, the spell would end. You can also only cast one composition spell, again, cantrip or otherwise, per turn. So let's say you have a composition spell that doesn't even have a duration, it's just a single use. You can't cast that if you already did a composition cantrip this turn, so just keep that in mind. All composition spells must, and this is both, again, cantrip or regular spell, must be accompanied by either an auditory or visual performance component. So you are either playing music, maybe you're orating something, perhaps you're dancing, but you're doing something that comes along with these. So there's always a performative aspect to what you're doing, which is honestly just great flavor. Getting back to the performance skill, again, while performance isn't a very high-rated skill in my book, you really want to get probably pretty deep in there. You can use it in a lot of ways that other classes can't use performance. Not only will it help you with your spells, you don't actually need to boost it for that, but there's a lot of class feats that will help you really lean into it. And honestly, in my opinion, for Bard alone, performance is an S-tier skill. Paizo really wanted you to get a lot out of what should be a very Bard thing. Each subclass, or Muse, provides 2 benefits at level 1, and then there are special feats that have requirements of certain muses in order to take later on. So for each muse, we'll talk about what you get at level 1, and then I'll give an example of a feat that you can pick up later on. The first is Enigma. This is your mysterious subclass. So your muse feat is Bardic Lore. You gain proficiency in a special lore called Bardic Lore that allows you to recall knowledge about any topic using it. Sadly, it can only be raised above trained by becoming legendary in occultism, at which point that lore becomes expert, so you're not going to get to boost it like you can normal lore. But I mean, you can recall knowledge about any topic. That is absolutely nuts. Your Muse spell is Sure Strike. So Muse spells are spells that you get added to your actual spell list. These aren't composition cantrips, these aren't composition spells, these are spells added to your spell list. You get Sure Strike, and this lets you roll twice on your next strike, taking the better result. You also get to ignore the flat check to target creatures, so if you're, say, a ranged combatant and you're about to fire off a bow and you want to be able to target somebody in a fog cloud, well, if you cast Sure Strike first and then attack, no roll for you to worry about. You just attack them. So it's actually a pretty decent spell if you're going to try to get into martial combat as a bard. One of the feat examples is Assured Knowledge at level 6. When you use Recall Knowledge using any skill, including Bardic Lore, you can just take 10 plus your proficiency in that skill. And you don't take any other bonuses or penalties against that skill. So if you have penalties on you, you just get to ignore them. Also, you can take Automatic Knowledge, which is a skill feat, a very strong action compression skill feat, for any skill, even without having already taken Assurance in that skill. Normally you'd have to. So let's say I wanted to be able to, take this 10 plus roll and use one of these for free, which is what Automatic Knowledge lets you do at the beginning of a turn, for like 3 or 4 different skills. That would take a lot of skill feats normally. Because of Assured Knowledge, no, you're good to go. You can take far fewer skill feats here, which is really strong. The next muse is Maestro, your very artistic subclass. You'd think they all are. This one's probably the most. Muse feat is Lingering Composition. This gives you a free action focus spell that you can use to extend the duration of the next composition cantrip you cast. So you make a performance check against a standard DC for your level, which means you have a pretty good chance at succeeding. This costs a focus point as you would normally have to spend with a focus spell, but a success makes it so that your next cantrip will last 3 rounds instead of 1. 4 on a crit success. So if you really are going to cast something and you want to make sure it keeps going because you plan on doing other stuff with your turn, this could be a great way to set yourself up for success with just 1 focus point. Your Muse spell is Soothe. This is the premier healing spell on the occult spell list. This heals a good amount of health and provides a bonus to saves against mental effects. But considering how few options there are to heal on the occult spell list, this is great to have. Your feat example here is Harmonize. This is level 6 and takes 1 action. It's a special spell shape composition. So spell shapes are things you cast before spells to augment them. The next composition spell that you cast can be active even when you have another composition active. So you've got your composition cantrip running, and you want to cast a composition spell, and you want them both running at the same time. This is how you do it. So not only does it allow 2 running at the same time, but allows 2 casts in the same round, like I just described. The whole idea is that you want to be able to have 2 things going at the same time using your artistic abilities. This is great. Between the spells and this spell shape, you have a whole turn accounted for, but the combo of buffs can be very strong. So keep in mind that a lot of your composition spells and cantrips are going to buff your allies. Doubling up on some buffs, not same buffs, but doubling up on types of buffs you can give them can be very, very strong. Polymath, which is your jack of all trades subclass. Your Muse feat is Versatile Performance. Performance, again, really strong for you. This makes it like the ultimate skill in the world for you. You can utilize it instead of diplomacy to make an impression. You can use it instead of intimidation to demoralize, and instead of deception to impersonate. So now you're using performance for just everything. Also, you can use your proficiency in performance to meet prerequisites for diplomacy, intimidation, and deception. So let's say you've gotten to level 15 and you want to take the skill feat that intimidation gets at this level, which is Scare to Death. You can just take it, and you're using performance. This is awesome. Makes you the ultimate performer. Your Muse spell is Phantasmal Minion. It's a 3-action sustained spell. You summon a phantasmal minion and you can choose for it to be invisible or not. Kind of cool. I don't know that you'll find it as useful as maybe some of the other Muse spells we've already talked about, but if you like to summon invisible things and you're very creative, it can be very interesting. Your feat example is Versatile Signature. Each morning during daily preparations, you get to change one of your signature spells. What are signature spells? Bards are spontaneous casters, which means all their level 1 spells that they choose, sure, they can use it with any level 1 spell slots, but you can't normally upcast them. Well, you can choose a signature spell at that first level. Starting at level 3, you get these. And at each spell level, you're going to get a signature spell. Once chosen, though, you're done. That's your signature spell. Well, with this, every morning, you get to change one of your signature spells. So if you decided that today you know what you're going to have to deal with, you might want to be able to upcast Fear really easily, because at level 3 it's a lot better. Maybe you just want to go ahead and do that. So you make Fear your signature spell for the day, even though normally it's something else entirely. Warrior, the combat subclass. So if you really want to get deep into your martial combat, this might be your choice. Your Muse feat is Martial Performance. When you have Courageous Anthem active, the one we talked about that every bard gets, if you damage a creature with a strike, it extends the composition cantrip for another round for free. Yes, you have to land a hit to do this, but suddenly you're saving yourself 1 casting every single turn if you keep this up. This will also apply to 2 other composition cantrips if you take the required feats. These are Rallying Anthem and Song of Strength. Both of these are about buffing allies in a very combat-focused way. Your Muse spell is Fear, which is kind of cool, because you think all about attacking, this would feel like the Sure Strike one. But no, this is Fear. Fear is an extremely powerful first-level control spell. It afflicts creatures with the frightened condition, even on a successful save from them. If they get a crit success, they're fine. But even on a successful save, they get frightened 1. It is a very good spell, and at level 3, it just becomes ridiculous. Your feat is Reflexive Courage, that I'm going to talk about here. It's level 8, and it's a reaction. You get access to basically Reactive Strike. So if you look at Reactive Strike and you look at how this is written, pretty much the same thing. The only difference is that you have to have Courageous Anthem going to use it. So if Courageous Anthem isn't active anymore, you don't get to use your reaction to strike. It's not a huge deal, because you're gaining such strong boosts to have it going anyway, so you're going to want Courageous Anthem going most of the time. But just keep this in mind. This really helps you act, though, as a true, what's called Gish. If you're not used to that term, I'm guessing you are. Yeah, these are your spell-casting martial combo characters. That's what this subclass is really great for. Our final muse is Zoophonia, the nature subclass. Zoophonic communication is your muse feat. You can use the performance rather than diplomacy to request from animals, though you still don't understand them. You can also use performance to command an animal. So, okay, more uses for a skill you already love. Command an animal can definitely come up often if you do have an animal companion, because that's how you use an animal companion. You command the animal. Your muse spell is Summon Animal. For 3 actions, this is a sustain spell where you get to create an animal of CR -1, at least at level 1. The level of the creature goes up if you upcast it. This includes things, though, like eagles, guard dogs, and vipers. So you get to summon, and then every round you sustain it to keep the creature out there, and it follows your commands. A feat example is Zoophonic Composition, level 4. This is a free action. If your last action was to cast a composition spell, you can either sustain a summon animal spell, or you can command an animal. This is great action compression, and the fact that you can just do this every round is amazing. In fact, if I was going to play a Zoophonia Muse, I would almost certainly want to take the Beastmaster archetype if I'm in a free archetype world here, because now you can command your animal and be casting your buffs and still have 2 actions left over. This can be very, very fun. While some feats for the subclass may not be the strongest, this one is fantastic. Obviously, those are just a few of the feats. Each muse has more feats than that require them, but we'll leave that to our Bard subclass rankings video. I'm going to try something new in this video, and this is a way to help show what a class is best at and worst at. So I am going to essentially rank the class in 6 critical areas. These 6 aspects are aspects of combat, so I'm not worrying about your social encounters, and I'm not worried about anything you're doing in exploration. This is because combat encounters dominate most tables, and I don't want to get too bogged down in trying to rank too many things. Each category I talk about will be ranked from 1 to 5, so let's get it up here for the Bard. Kicking off with versatility. By versatility, I mean how easily the class can build variety into their playstyle. If on a given turn, you can either run up and attack twice, or run up and attack once but hit really hard, that's not a lot of versatility. If you can pull all kinds of tricks out of your hat, turn to turn, switching up what you're doing, offering up different playstyles for the different situations that have arisen, thanks to what's going on with the enemies and your allies, that's a lot of versatility. The Bard gets a 4 for versatility. This is a class that not only has full spell casting, but the composition cantrips offer support and some slight control options while leaving actions available. They would have gotten a 5, but you essentially have to use an action every turn to use their primary feature, limiting their versatility somewhat. Next, we have single target damage, which is pretty self-explanatory, but the reason this is important is because, honestly, the best tactic most of the time when you're trying to actually get rid of enemies off the battlefield is to focus fire them down. So strong single target damage affects the way that a team plays together. This is not the Bard's strong suit. The occult spell list isn't exactly full of high damage spells, but they do get a small boost as they can wage in and fight in martial ways. This could be melee or ranged. They're just not going to hit as hard as primary martial characters, but they're pretty decent for a spell caster, so I'm going to give them a 2 here. If you really want to wage in and do a little better, take the Warrior Muse, but I'm going to assume not everybody's going to do that. All right, as for multi-target damage, or AoE, as some people think about it, again, the occult spell list really isn't known for this. Even worse, none of the composition spells fit this role either. Honestly, they landed a 1 here for me. There's a lot of great spell lists for doing multi-target damage. Occult just isn't the one, and they really don't have feats that are helping with this either. Support, on the other hand, is another story. I consider support to be all things that benefit allies, from healing to buffs to creating advantageous situations, even providing knowledge. In a team game like Pathfinder, this is a critical part of the game, and bards are masters of it. While healing isn't their strongest suit, No one can buff the team like a bard can. The composition, cantrips, and spells are mostly focused on this pillar of combat, and the bard gets a 5 out of 5 here from me. Control is almost like the flip side of the coin to support. Control is how you manage enemies on the battlefield. This can be debuffing, creating obstacles, altering the battlefield, forcing their actions, or even locking them down. Bards have the entire occult spell list once again, and the occult spell list does this better than they do anything else. Not many of their composition spells are control focused actually, and they don't have many feats to aid them here, but they're getting a 4 out of 5 because they still do have some added on, and that occult spell list is really good for this. Finally, we have survivability. There may be those who don't find this terribly important, but when you're a wizard wearing no armor with few hit points, well, the dragon knows who to target on the first turn. Survivability is a combination of health, armor, saving throws, mobility, and anything you can do to take hits, dodge hits, dodge effects, keep out of harm's way. All of that falls under survivability. Spellcasters aren't usually great here. However, the bard gets reasonable HP with that 8 per turn rather than 6 for a lot of the spellcasters, and they have light armor, which is better than no armor proficiency at all, and their light armor will give them an okay AC. They get a 2 from me. It's still not amazing, but it's slightly better than your standard spellcaster might get. As you can see, they have a solid role to play on the team and in the party, but they aren't an all-rounder like some classes might try to be. If you do love playing that support style character and you want to be able to buff the party and see what you provide to them really play out solidly, this is a great class for you. What I'm going to run through here are the rest of the level 1 feats that are more general to Bard and aren't Muse specific. I'll throw in a couple higher feats at the end to kind of show you what happens, but here's an idea of feats you can look at. Hymn of Healing, level 1, grants you the Hymn of Healing composition spell. This is not a cantrip, and it grants fast healing, which means every turn you get hit points back, to one creature within range. Also immediately heals that much when cast or sustained, so you will have to sustain this. It's not a ton, but it does scale up okay every time you heighten the spell. Keep in mind that focus spells auto-heighten as you level up. Reach spell, which is a very common spell shape that almost all spellcasters get, it increases the range of your next spell you cast by 30 feet. Even if it's a melee touch spell, it can now have a 30-foot reach. It won't increase in emanation, however. Well-versed, you get a passive +1 bonus to saves against any effect with any of the following traits. Linguistic, sonic, auditory, visual, or illusion. That does cover a ton of spells and effects. So you might just find it useful if you want to have a little more of that survivability I talked about. All right, let's jump up and check out something a little higher level. Level 10, House of Imaginary Walls. This grants you the House of Imaginary Walls composition cantrip. This lets you create a 10-foot by 10-foot wall that isn't real, or is it? Basically, creatures watching you mime the invisible wall can try to disbelieve it, and then it won't exist for them. But otherwise, it does exist for them. Your allies can choose to believe it's real, and then you can use it to create things that they can get on top of. This is an amazing tool for creativity. It's great against creatures who aren't very smart. It can really alter the battlefield. This is a dream for somebody who really wants to play around with things. And let's go ahead and jump all the way up to 18 with All in My Head. This is a reaction. When you take damage, you can choose to believe it's all in your head. The damage changes to mental and becomes non-lethal damage unless it has the death trait on it, or would otherwise instantly kill you for some other reason other than damage. This can be a fantastic way to survive something that you otherwise shouldn't survive, and it's also absolutely hilarious, even if it wouldn't have killed you. Maybe you just prefer to take mental damage. You can't resist this in any way, but it's still very funny to just sit there and be like, nope, didn't happen, not bleeding, it's totally fine. The easiest muse for most players is probably going to be Maestro. The Soothe spell is an easy way to heal the party up, and it's really an easy spell to understand. For anybody looking to get into the fray and fight alongside allies, I recommend the Warrior Muse. Not only does it ignore the composition cantrip tax some rounds, you also get to take advantage of the bonus that your composition cantrip gives you, that +1 to attack and +1 to damage. Most bards will be the same when it comes to your ability scores, but I do think there's a little bit to think about when you're going full caster versus partial marshals. So for a full caster build, you're looking at charisma at the top, obviously, and then constitution to take some hits, dexterity to help boost up your armor, Wisdom is usually a good follow after that, unless you want intelligence to take a few more skills, and you're dumping strength. As far as partial martial builds or weapon builds, charisma followed by dexterity is your secondary, and then constitution and probably strength to add a little more damage if you're going melee. If you're going ranged, drop strength still and keep wisdom or int. Otherwise, in this build, you're dropping wisdom and int, leaving them at 10. Let's put together a level 1 build for a warrior muse real quick. So if I'm going to build a warrior muse, I'm going to take a rapier and a short bow. Rapier is a solid weapon, especially if you're going to get a bonus to your chance to hit and therefore increasing your chance to crit slightly, but it's just a high damage finesse weapon. Short bows are good because you're probably going to need to be close to your allies anyway, or they're not going to get your buff. So no reason to worry about something that can hit from 120 feet away. You need to be closer than that. Armor, you can throw on studded leather, because we went with the build we talked about. You'll have a +1 in strength, and therefore you can meet the strength requirement for studded leather, giving you a nice AC. And we'll throw on a steel shield in this case, because you only have the rapier as well. Your stats will be +4 in charisma, +3 in dex, +1 in con, +1 in strength, and the others will be at a +0. Some cantrips I would suggest you take are Guidance, Light, Detect Magic, Phase Bolt, and Void Warp, just kind of for fun. You want a mix of utility stuff here and some damage, especially as you're going to be looked at as support by your team. For your straight up spells, there's a lot of great choices at level 1 on the occult spell list. Honestly, it's fantastic. Spoiled for choice. I think something like Bane to help debuff the enemies around you, because you're going to get into combat. And Runic Weapon, if you want to give your weapon a nice little boost itself, can be great level 1 casts. But also you just get fear from your muse, which is honestly one of, if not the strongest first level spell you can take. So solid rounding out here. You got buffs from your composition spells and cantrips. You've got debuffs from your actual spells. You're in a good spot. All right, let's run through a quick combat example to show off bard gameplay. There are 2 of us in the party here. Our bard, Jangles, and the monk, Jill. We are facing off against a horde of kobolds. As a warrior bard, Jangles would want to get up in melee combat. Everyone rolls initiative. It looks like one of the kobolds goes first and rushes Jill. It makes 2 strikes, landing a hit with the first and dealing modest damage to Jill. Jangles is up next. For his first action, he is going to use his composition cantrip, Courageous Anthem. This gives both Jangles and Jill a +1 bonus to attack rolls and to damage on a hit. Jangles will then use his next 2 actions to cast Fear on one of the kobolds who hasn't taken a turn yet. It is now the other kobold's turn that isn't frightened. This kobold runs up to flank Jill, giving a better chance to land a crit and allow it to use its sneak attack feature. Luckily for Jill, it only lands 1 hit, but thanks to sneak attack, Jill has 1 hit point remaining. Jill is up and decides she needs to deal with some problems. She uses Flurry of Blows for 1 action, and takes 2 swings at the first kobold, landing both thanks to the +1 and dealing more than enough damage. She then pulls out a health potion and takes a swig, leaving the recent kobold in melee. Finally, the third kobold critically failed its will save against Fear and must use its turn to run away. As the first kobold is dead, it's Jangles' turn. Our bard will begin by casting Courageous Anthem again. Jangles will then run up and flank the kobold who attacked Jill and strike with his rapier. Because of Courageous Anthem, Jangles has a +7 to hit chance, and because the kobold is being flanked, its AC is effectively a 14, giving Jangles a 50% chance to hit and a 20% chance to critically hit. With a quick jab, Jangles hits the creature and deals 7 damage. This also means Jangles won't need to spend 1 action next turn to keep Courageous Anthem running. The kobold is in clear danger and decides to make a single attack against Jangles, which misses, and then 2 actions to run. Jill follows immediately, but must leave the Courageous Anthem range to catch up. She does and still knocks the kobold unconscious. The frightened kobold makes a return and manages to get up to Jill. With its last action, it actually knocks Jill unconscious. This doesn't sit well with Jangles, who decides to deal with the kobold. Using 2 actions, he rushes up to the creature and strikes for the third. Thanks to Courageous Anthem, and the creature being frightened too, it is a crit, and Jangles deals 20 damage thanks to the rapier's deadly trait. And that'll be the end of this kobold and this encounter. Okay, so there's a look at playing a bard. Hopefully that gives you a good idea for the play style. You can see there's a lot of versatility, like we talked about earlier, with the Bard. So really take advantage of what you can do every turn, because you really can change the way that the battlefield feels, especially for your allies. There are plenty of pop culture examples of bards. We don't see them fighting often enough. Honestly, they're usually in the background, playing music to really boost the party's morale. But we do occasionally see them get in there. I would actually say a good example for this is the hobbits from Lord of the Rings. And by this, I really mean Pippin and Merry more than anybody else, because they really are playing that role. They are inspiring others more than they're actually fighting themselves, but they play a very critical role on the battlefield. What do you think? Does it seem like bards would be a fun class to play? What do you think of me putting in my new assessment of the class? Please give me some feedback. I'd love to get your thoughts. Love it or hate it, I'm good either way. Just give me something to change. Thank you so much, and as always, adventure on.